Our event design, be the architect of your next great event. I'm your host, Denise Evans, Director of Continuing Education and Language Programs for UTRGV. Our unit provides high quality professional education for the Rio Grande Valley area communities and also for our UTRGV community, faculty, staff, and students. So today we have professional event planner Devin Montgomery Pasha as our guest speaker. Devin has created major events for clients from universities to the Philadelphia Eagles football team. So you are all in for a real treat today, especially right here before the holidays, as she talks about the art and science of building your next key event. Please feel free to post any questions for Devin on YouTube comments section. They will not appear in the recording of this event, so you can feel comfortable about doing so. So Devin, welcome, and let's get started on our event planning.
Hi, thank you so much for that warm welcome, Ms. Evans. Hi, y'all. My name is Devin Montgomery Pasha. I am a CMP and CED. Those are two event designations. And I'm here to talk to you about being the architect of your next great event. So I am a professional event designer, which is something like being an event architect. And just by way of introduction, just want to let y'all know that I am a native Texan. So my mom was born in Mercedes, Texas. So I'm a huge fan of the RGV and looking forward to sharing some knowledge with y'all this afternoon. So on the next slide, I'll introduce myself a little bit. So I have been in special events for a little over 15 years, 10 of them in the higher ed system. I'm a lifelong learner, so I always make sure to continue education, which I'm so glad y'all are doing with us today. So I earned my CMP in 2020 and my CED, Certified Event Designer, in 2021, and I'm still working on my master's in creativity and neuroscience. I'm also a proud mama. That's my baby girl, Shireen Rose. She's going to be 5 years old in January, and I talk about her a lot in my event work. So, just want to share a little bit about me, and we'll move on to a little bit about what event design is. So event design is a strategic tool to help you meet your goals. And it's really about human-centric. So thinking about the people, human-centric design helps you get the desired behavior you want out of your event attendees. So the difference between event design and event planning is like the difference between being an architect and a contractor. So if y'all were going to build a building in the valley and you didn't have an architect and someone said, hey, go build a brand new school, we'd be like, well, what's it for? And who's going to be there? And how big do you want it to be? So imagine being an event planner. Someone says, hey, go plan that event. Well, you're going to ask those same questions. An event designer is the architect who takes all that information to create the blueprint of the event itself before giving it to the planning team who can make informed decisions on how to get to those desired end results. I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. So how to be a great event designer and how to be the architect for your next great event is all about asking the right questions. So this is applicable for every style of event, from small events, large events, citywide events, to quinceañeras and weddings. And remember that because you've always done an event, it's not a reason to do it anymore. You still want to make sure, even if it's an annual event, that you're asking strategic questions. And this is true, again, for any shop, any size, any style of event. So the first one you always want to ask is, what is the purpose of the event? Why are you planning the gathering? Who are you trying to engage? And what do you want them to do, to feel, to say when they have left you? And those last two are super important because event design is all about creating that behavior change that you want out of your attendees. So if you know what you want them to do, to feel, to think, and to say when they've left your event, then you know how to design for that experience. But right now, on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the next most important question, which is the who. So we're going back to the human-centric event design. And designing events for the who. Because in the end, we are all the who. We are all human. We are all the people who are going to experience that event. So understanding and engaging those people to get them to do, feel, and say what you want them to do is the most essential part of understanding good event design and getting the outcomes that you want for your event. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the method and the madness. So I say this all the time. There's a method to my madness. And I know some of y'all are nodding your heads right now being like, I say that all the time. So there is actually a science to the art of great event design and great event planning. So I'm going to talk to you a couple seconds about the science behind getting people to do what you want them to do. And by understanding that human aspect of your stakeholders, of your attendees and your sponsors, your event owners, all of those stakeholders, you can design for the behavior you want instead of entertaining them and hoping that they do what you want them to do. So that's the real key. That's the linchpin. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain. What does your brain do? I'm sure y'all probably learned that in high school biology at some point, learned it and forgot it. But real quick, your brain controls functions, controls feelings, stores and retrieves information. I'm sure you guys have heard it's like a big computer, right? Constantly storing, pulling, and restoring information. It makes connections, which is really important because the more you learn something and use knowledge, the stronger the brain connections become. There's actually a statistic that says you have more connections in your brain than there are stars in the galaxy. Just think about that for a second. You have more connections in your brain than there are stars in the galaxy. And the more you utilize knowledge, the more you retrieve experiences and memories, the stronger those connections become, which is really important to creating lasting memories in your attendees. There's also lots of myths about the brain. I'm sure some of you have heard that there's right brain and left brain. That is actually a myth. There's only one brain, and different sides of the brain actually connect and talk to each other in order to control function, feeling, thoughts, memories, and emotions. So, more about the brain and moving on a little bit, I'm going to talk about neuroplasticity. And I'm sure y'all are going like, wait, what? She is a scientist? No. But this concept, neuroplasticity, is about understanding that your brain is constantly changing. And your brain has the constant ability to learn, adapt, and move forward. So, believe it or not, right this very second, I'm actually changing your brain. Spooky, right? No, just kidding. But to share an anecdote, I'm sure y'all have seen somewhere about maybe someone in a service who's maybe lost a limb and had to relearn how to walk or how to eat or how to move after an accident. That's the brain's ability to relearn and to reform connections in the brain to get it to do what you want it to do. So, by understanding that the brain is constantly changing and has the unlimited capacity to learn and grow, you can use that to change your attendees, your event owners, your sponsors' behavior by getting them to do what you want them to do. So it's like learning a little hack when you're designing an event, thinking through how the brain works, how connections are made, and how people can learn and grow, and utilizing that to your advantage when designing your next great event. So, thinking through about what humans need, this is a little pyramid. It's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Basically, what this is saying is that we as humans all need the same basic things in order to survive and thrive and actually get to be what's called self actualized. And that's the little top of the pyramid. And what you want from your event attendees and your sponsors and your owners is to feel self actualized. But you need to make sure that you build them up to that actualization by looking at the bottom of the pyramid. The one on the bottom is the easiest. We all have physiological needs. We need to be fed. We need to feel warm. We need water. We need sleep. So, a great example of that is thinking through, do your attendees have enough to eat? Do they have enough breaks to use the restroom? Do they have enough access to water or coffee throughout your event? Safety needs, next one up. I know COVID is a great example. People wanted to hear when coming to your event how you were going to keep them safe and how they could be safe before making the decision to come. Social needs, we need to feel a sense of belonging. I want to feel like I know somebody at that event. I want to feel like I belong there. So, how can you make sure that all of your attendees feel that belonging when coming to the event? The next is esteem. And that's positive energy. It's feeling like, thank you so much for coming. Your attendance was so valuable. I feel great. You leave feeling a positive self evaluation, a dignity, and achievement. And that helps get you to self actualization. So the goal is getting there. But I have another way of showing you how you can think through that in terms of an event. So on the next slide, we'll see something you guys all might recognize, which is a banquet chair. I'm sure some of you are like, yes, I know that chair. I've hauled that chair. I've stacked that chair. A professor of mine named Joanne Dennison actually adapted that little hierarchy to what we call sitting in the attendee's chair, which has twofold meaning. It's about thinking through how your attendees are going to move through the event, but also metaphorically thinking through that Maslow hierarchy in terms of sitting in the chair. So if we're looking at the attendee's chair and thinking through the bottom of the pyramid, basic physical needs, again, it's, do they have enough food or time to eat? Do they have enough breaks to go to the restroom? Are they too hot or too cold? Is the event space the right temperature, light or dark? Moving up, do they feel safe? Sometimes, walking into a really dark theater for a presentation, you get a little hesitant because it's dark in there and your brain says, hey, wait, that might not be a safe place. So making sure everything is well lit. Again, the sense of belonging. Do I know anyone? Well, I feel like I belong. Well, I feel left out. And then esteem, making sure all of your attendees feel the dignity and appreciation from having come to and attended your event to help them get to self-actualization, which was, I am forever changed, forever happy, or forever fundamentally moved or educated or changed by that event. So always remember, as you're walking through and designing that next great experience, sit in the attendee's chair. Which moves me to my next point and the next slide, which is talking a little bit about the work I do with the Event Design Collective, and the tools that we use in the collective as certified event designers to really think through the attendee experience and really to design for that change in behavior that you want to make your event the most successful. So we have a couple of maps, we call them. I'm going to show you 3 of them today. This first one here is what we call a stakeholder alignment canvas. So I'll give you a short anecdote, which is, how many times have any of you planned an event and had the event owner or a parent or someone come in and be like, why the heck did you do that? How did you get there? Why are we in this space? Why is there a piano? And you're like, well, I thought this was what you wanted. I thought this is what you had communicated to me. And clearly at some point we had gotten out of alignment with what was important to that particular stakeholder. In this Event Design Collective, we use this tool to really think through all of the stakeholders, anyone who's got stake in the game for that event. And then we plot them on this chart to see who has the most power and the least power, who has the most interest and who has the least interest. And what you end up with in that sort of top right corner are the people with the most power and the most interest in your event. And those are the ones who you really need to think about when designing that event. And of course, we have what we call our overarching aim, which is that flag on the top of the mountain, which is that overarching goal. What needs to happen for the event to appear successful? In the next map, we have what we call our empathy map. So in order to really understand your stakeholder, those ones that we really need to delight, we use what we call an empathy map. And really utilize your skills. We always do this in a group, and thinking about what those people really need. Who are they, and how do we identify their behavior before they come to your event? Because if you can do that, then you can identify the behavior after they've left and really think through that change. So as you can see here on our empathy map, we ask questions of each other. What does this person see? What do they think and feel? What do they hear? What influences them? What do they say and do? That's a real behavior question. And then, of course, what are their pain points on a daily basis, maybe before coming to that event? What are their possible gains from those pain points? And then on the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about our event canvas. So the event canvas is a tool I use on a daily basis when designing events. So we take the information from those empathy maps and we literally stick it on this tool. We use Post-it notes and we write them down and we stick them up there. It's a fun physical exercise. And these little 14 blocks walk me through that stakeholder that we've identified that we need to delight. And we think through what are their commitments? Like, what do they have to commit to coming to that event? But what is that possible return? Again, what are their pain points? But what would they gain? Those like immediate gains. Are there any costs for that person? Are there possible revenues for those costs? What are their expectations? Maybe social media is like kind of building them up, for this particular event. I know in the Valley, y'all just had your big Christmas parade. So a lot of social media hype. So I'm going to have expectations in going to that event. But what are the satisfactions for those expectations? And by plotting around this tool, you really start to answer the questions about what those stakeholders need and how to answer those needs in order to get that behavior that they want. And when we say that behavior, we're talking about the things that they're going to feel, going to learn, going to think, going to say, and going to do after they've come to your event. So to wrap up, there's a lot of positive outcomes that you can have from thinking through the design and the architecture of your next great event. By utilizing these skills and asking these questions, utilizing some of the tools that we use in the Event Design Collective, you're going to generate more ideas to choose from for those stakeholders to get to that desired behavior. You're going to be able to solve more problems with that framework in order to get to that really successful event. You're going to make more connections amongst yourselves and your stakeholders. You're going to be able to see the impact of that event and track it, like sort of a greater ROI. By designing for those stakeholders, you're going to create stronger memories for them, which will be helpful down the line if you need to convert them into clients or repeat customers. And of course, more productivity and motivation among the participants, both internally for yourselves on your team and with your guests. So I know we're going to pause for some questions, but I just want to take a moment to say thank you. I hope you all enjoyed my presentation, and maybe we'll go to some Q&A.
Thank you, Devin. That's an amazing take on how to do event planning. It's just fantastic how that's framed and organized. And I know I've done event planning throughout my career, but I would never have thought to frame it this way and organize it this way, and wish I had known. So let's turn to some questions from our viewers. Sometimes the people who hire you may have their own idea about event design that might clash with the structured process that you just shared in your presentation. So how do you convince them based on how you know the event should be put together?
Absolutely. And that is a great question. And it all goes back to those strategic questions. Oftentimes there's people like, well, we've always done it this way and we've seen success. And it's like, okay, let's track it. Do you have any data? Who are you still designing for? What were those desired results? Because oftentimes you're going to find one of two things. If they have all of that assessment data, maybe survey results, attendee numbers, again, you go back to asking the questions. You're like, yes, you get 1,000 people to come to this event every year. But are those 1,000 people doing what you want them to do? Are they buying your product? Are they engaging with your business? Are they turning into repeat customers? Keep asking those strategic questions, because eventually what will happen is you'll get to the answer, which is, yes, they are doing what we want them to do, in which case you work that existing framework into your event design process. Or if you do find through that strategic question process that they're not actually getting the value that they think, then you go back and say, okay, yes, on paper, it looks like you're getting the results, but if we dig a little deeper, I think we're maybe missing the boat on getting you the exact person in the room or getting those exact people to do exactly what you want them to do. Perhaps we can join forces, and if you'll allow me some time and space to work with your team to dig through this group, to really think through those stakeholders and design, again, the whole design process for stakeholder takes about an hour. So if you can spare me an hour to think through that exact group, we'll be able to identify some points that will help us design a better experience for them. And then we can braid our ideas together.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So another question that we had was, and talking about, getting the results that you want for your event. So how do you connect that end result and the architecture of your event with the promotional aspect of your event? If you're trying, let's say you're a nonprofit and you're trying to develop an event to assist with fundraising.
Absolutely.
How do you connect that with the promotional aspect of promoting that event in the first place?
Well, and again, it goes back to identifying, especially for not-for-profits, working in higher ed for so long, it's one of the biggest not-for-profits. We are always fundraising, right? And always trying to get our attendees to do what we want them to do, which is either engage more with us if it's not an ask for money, or it's an ask for money. And you need to set their expectations clearly. A lot of times with fundraising events, everyone's like, oh, they're just going to ask me for money. And that's a preconceived expectation of that event, which you either have to satisfy, or it's a falsity. And through your promotions, you say, we're looking for your engagement. We just want your presence. We want to thank you or steward you for being such a strong member of our group. Goes back to that esteem and sense of belonging. So that promotional aspect actually has to help set the expectations, and your event has to satisfy those expectations to build that sense of trust with that particular stakeholder group. On the inside of that event canvas that I showed you earlier, we have two things called jobs to be done and the promise. And the promise is like a little gift. And what I think about the promise is, if you had a 140 character tweet, or as a slightly older person, I say, if you had the movie tagline for your event, 140 characters, what would it be? Because if you think about dialing down for that particular stakeholder, what the promise of that event is, and you give that to your marketing team, that's what they have to stay true to when promoting the event itself. And you have to think about your stakeholders. To give a quick anecdote, one of the first events I did for a higher ed institution, they asked me to do it at a really chic museum. It was one of those ones that had those big dioramas, and we were having like cocktails in front of a moose and appetizers in front of an Arctic panda or something. And so we had food all over the museum, so you could really go and interact. And the marketing team used the word, come join us for dinner. Now, there was food served in a dinner time period, and it was, different stations and small plates and past appetizers and, strolling snakes and 3 different cocktail stations. But to our oldest group of people, when we use the word dinner, they expected tables, chairs, forks and knives, and a served plate of food. And so what we heard from that group was, we looked and we sat at a table, but we never got dinner. Because to them, strolling food and having to look for your own meal did not satisfy that expectation. And so we created a sense of mistrust with that particular group, all over one word. So that goes back to that sense of alignment and thinking through each group that you're inviting and trying to delight, or the behavior you're trying to get from them. And once you have that succinct through your design, that's what you give to the marketing team and say, don't deviate. This is our blueprint. This is our design. This is what we want from them. So how can you help us get to that desired behavior with your messaging, ensuring that here is our design process. Don't stray from this, and don't add your own verbiage that might set those expectations away from what we have identified as being the right framework for them for this particular event.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a great example. And so we have another question. What are some variables that change drastically between planning a small event and a really large event, and from a planning perspective, other than cost, obviously, which
right. I mean, of course, planning, a bridal shower is going to be super different from planning the Super Bowl parade, right? So the biggest difference you really have is the number of stakeholders that you will identify as having stake in the game, which may mean that there's some competition for who you need to delight with that event. Large scale events, like especially ones open to the public, tend to have some competition for who you're going to delight, or the broad spectrum of, like, when we say attendees, that could mean 1 million people. Well, in 1 million people, you're going to have a large difference of ages, races, genders. And so it becomes a little bit more generalized about their experience, versus if you have a smaller event, let's say you're planning a wedding, your stakeholders are going to get a little bit more condensed, and you're going to be able to identify them in a less broad spectrum way, because you might have the bride's family, the groom's family, the venue, mom and dad are paying. So they're kind of the event owners. So you have to delight them as well as delighting the couple. So you see, it just changes the scope of that. But, and then of course the guests coming to the wedding, you have a better idea of who's coming, because the demographics are going to be a lot smaller versus, the Rose Bowl parade, which might have 1 million people along a parkway, just slightly different experience.
Yeah, great. So we have another question from a viewer. How do you rebound from an event that did not go as well as you had hoped?
Well, personally, I go cry, because that is how I deal with things. And y'all, it is not a large event if I have not cried in a corner at least one time. But that's how I deal with stress, and that's how I deal with events that don't go well, because I'm an empathetic person, and I always feel bad because I want everything to go perfectly. But after I've had that good cry, I go to the data and I figure out, okay, why did this not go correctly? Because I bet you $1 that you can find where the misalignment was, or your misaligned ideas about what that stakeholder group needed. And when you find that misalignment, then you know kind of where the event went off the rails. And oftentimes it's expectations of those groups, or not really understanding them, not taking that time to empathize and deep dive and think about their behavior and that desired behavior, or you haven't identified the desired behavior. So your experience wasn't congruous with what the outcome needed to be. A great example, if you're fundraising and you need to raise money at that event, but at no point ask people to get out their checkbook to give the money, and you're like, well, we didn't raise the $10,000. It's like, yeah, I know you failed at that, but did you ask? So yes, that event was a failure, but because you didn't design the experience to get the desired behavior from those attendees. And it could be something as simple as, did you ask them to do that? Mm-hmm. So yes, I've had events that have failed and not gone as well as I've hoped. And there are some things that are out of your control. And that, again, I will say, as a seasoned event professional, the first thing you have to do is let go of the things that are out of your control. Weather, acts of God, road closures, like, there are things you can pivot around, but at the same time, like, not all of that is your fault. So let go of the stuff you can't control, and then focus in on the stuff you may have had control over. And then use that to go back to our first question of, I know how to do it. It's like, did you know how to do it? Because here's actually what happened. And you didn't allow my team the amount of time and space to design strategically for those desired results. And now you're disappointed with them. So always use the data to your advantage, even if it means you have to learn the hard way and you apply it the next time.
Perfect. Love the data-driven aspect of that. That's a great pointer. That's a great pointer. We have time for just one more quick question.
Sure.
Let's see. So with the holidays approaching, what's your advice for de-stressing holiday event planning, whether it's just for a small, intimate gathering with family and friends, or maybe on a larger scale for your department? Because I know some of us are still in the planning mode.
Absolutely. So the first thing to remember is that it's all about desired results. And really that means about connection, community, celebration. So first of all, you have to put in, planners, you got to put in good to get out good, right? So we are oftentimes the last people to think about feeding ourselves, watering ourselves, or taking that time. So during the holidays, I always make time to make sure I feel the holiday spirit, how I like to feel it, so that I can make sure that I invite that spirit and embed it into the experiences of others. and ensuring that I know what holidays people celebrate, what is celebratory to them, and making sure that everyone feels represented. Again, it goes back to belonging, right? I want to feel like I belong to that event, that my events are celebrated as well. And in that sense of belonging, then you also have that sense of dignity. Like, wow, I really feel connected. I felt that holiday spirit, whether it's a little extra decoration or lighting, doesn't have to be expensive. Someone's favorite drink, or we all brought a cookie. Again, it's a community. But make sure that you're feeling that spirit too, because if you're stressed and you're, and overwhelmed and you haven't found a sense to find that like holiday magic in yourselves, you're not going to be able to give it to others. So don't forget, the most important thing, planners, designers, and anyone in our experience industry, is you have to put in good for you to put out good for others.
That's awesome advice. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. We are at the end of our time today. This has been such a joy to talk to you, Devin. Thank you so much for getting online with us today and for sharing your expertise with all of us today out there. We thank you so much for tuning in. And let me just wish everyone a very happy holiday from UTRGV Continuing Education and Language Programs. Thank you again for joining us today.
Happy holidays.